Hello, everyone. My name is Alan, and today I'm going to be talking about disease, parasites, and threats to moose in interior Alaska. So, before we get started, I'm going to do a quick species overview. If you're from the Fairbanks area, I'm sure you're plenty acquainted with what moose are, but they are the largest member of the deer family. Adult males can weigh up to 1,600 pounds. They're pretty big, and here in Alaska, we have the largest subspecies of moose around. They're solitary animals, and the males have those really distinct palmated antlers. They're really kind of iconic animals. They're in a lot of popular culture, very recognizable. And in the summer, they feed on forbs and aquatic vegetations, and all year round, they eat aspen, birch, and willow, either eating the leaves when there's leaves on them or the twigs, browsing in the winter. All right, so besides these just being really cool animals and helping with the biodiversity and being an integral part of the ecosystem in the northern boreal forest. Moose serve a lot of important roles for humans. They're hunted for sport and subsistence. There's about 7,000 moose harvested every year in Alaska, and that provides 3.5 million pounds of meat, that's a lot of meat. That's pretty cool. And revenue from hunting licenses help go towards moose management and conservation, and it also stimulates the local economy. There's a lot of people from other places that want to come to Alaska to hunt moose. It's an opportunity that not a lot of other places have. So if we take a look at the range and habitat of moose, you can see on the right that's the global range. They're kind of a circumboreal forest animal. They stretch all the way from Alaska across Canada down into the Rocky Mountains and then into a little bit of the northern Midwest, the UP and Minnesota, and in the Northeast, kind of Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire area. Over in Europe, there can be found across Scandinavia, a little bit in the north of Eastern Europe, and across Russia and Siberia. So they're pretty wide ranging. They're not threatened in a lot of their environments. They're stable, huntable populations, but there are some declines happening in other areas in the United States, like in the Northeast, because of some of the things we're going to talk about later today. So if we take a look at the map on the left, we see the range of moose in Alaska, and you can see they range all over the interior and down into south central the Alaska Peninsula. The only areas they're not really are some of the southeast islands. They're not in Kodiak, they're not in the Aleutians, and the very far north tundra and parts of western Alaska. But we're gonna talk about how they're extending their range a little bit later in the presentation. But let's move on to some potential threats posed to moose specifically in Alaska. So one thing moose have to deal with here in Alaska is disease, pests, and parasites, and invasive species. Also, they kind of go hand in hand with that. Invasive species carry a lot of those pests and parasites and disease, especially ones that the moose haven't had time to adapt to in their natural environment. Bringing in new things can be really destructive. Climate change also kind of goes hand in hand with the other ones. The effects of climate change could allow new invasive species to come in. Also, they are affecting the range of moose potentially in a positive way, but we'll talk a little bit more about later. And the last thing we're going to talk about is conflict with humans. All right, so here you can see on the left that moose has a disease that's called slipperfoot. It's from a dietary copper deficiency. So that moose isn't getting enough copper, and yeah, that's what causes that. I thought this is just one of the pretty strange, kind of sad ones to look at, but there's a lot of disease and parasites in moose that are present in the state right now. But what we're going to focus on is 3 diseases and parasites that aren't yet in the state, ones that we want to keep an eye out for and monitor for that might find their way up here, ones that have caused problems in other areas. And the first one we're going to talk about is chronic wasting disease. This is this is pretty common in a lot of other areas, and I think it's getting into Europe now too, and where I come from in Wisconsin, it was a big concern with the white-tailed deer. It's a degenerative brain disease. You can see in this picture, this is an elk in Idaho. It's got kind of the droopy ears, droopy head, emaciated. It's pretty much what the name says. The animals just waste away, and it is fatal to all members of the deer family, and it's carried and fed by all kinds of deer. Oh, I see. I spelled deer wrong there. Sorry about that. But yeah, it has not yet been detected in Alaska, but that's something we definitely want to keep a lookout for. The next disease I want to talk about is brainworm. It's a nematode worm that gets spread through feces. So the feces, I think, gets eaten by slugs, and then the slugs can be picked up by moose when they're browsing on bushes and shrubs and things. But yeah, here on the right we have a picture of a white-tailed deer because they carry this brainworm. The brainworm doesn't affect the white-tailed deer, doesn't kill them, it doesn't seem to really do anything to them. And when the white-tailed deer and the moose have overlapping habitat, that's when there's a big problem for the moose. They have a hard time dealing with that because it's fatal to them. And it's also fatal to caribou. So we really want to watch out for this one. Try to keep it out of the state. And the last one that we're going to talk about specifically is the winter tick. You can see on the right there's a moose affected with the winter tick. It's got the patchy hair. It's a blood-sucking parasite like other ticks, and it could be fatal in younger moose less than 2 years old just because it affects their ability to eat. And it happens from September to April, so through the winter, and you get this patchy hair loss. This one also has not been detected in the state yet, but has affected moose in other areas, and we want to keep an eye out for it. So, what are some management strategies for preventing these diseases? So, it's really about monitoring at this point. If you see any moose infected by these diseases, or moose you think might have one of these, you should report it to ADF&G. We want to inspect our livestock that we're importing into the state just so we don't bring anything in on accident. We don't want to import any deer species, and we want to do our best to prevent those non-native deer species from coming in with the brainworm and CWD and the winter tick and things like that. So I want to talk about mule deer in the interior because they can be a vector for all three of those diseases that we talked about earlier. And they're not native to Alaska. They're kind of expanding their territory right now. They're established in the Yukon Territory, and there have been sightings of them around Fairbanks and the Fort Knox gold mine. I think the most recent one that I could find was 2017. So that's one thing you want to watch out for. So the mule deer management strategies in place right now are that ADF&G is allowing year-long harvest, so you can shoot a mule deer any time of the year you see one, and then you want to harvest the samples from that, pretty much the whole carcass, and deliver that to ADF&G so they can do some testing on it. So if that's something you think you might want to do, I would encourage you to go check out the ADF&G website, and on there it says what samples you need to bring in if you shoot a mule deer. All right, next we're going to talk about moose and climate change. This one is kind of a double-edged sword for moose because getting warmer, other species coming in, that not having that really hard freeze might create more potential for diseases to come in that weren't here before, things like the winter tick. But also the warmer temperatures are leading to the shrub line kind of going up into the very far northern Arctic. The moose habitat's expanding because they have more food, more shrubs, things like that. So there could be a potential for some habitat gain, and there could be some hurting on the moose population because of those diseases. So it's really hard to tell where it's going to go from here. So conflicts with humans. Moose do pretty well in urban areas. If you know you're in Fairbanks, they lick the salt off of people's cars and wander around all the time. But they are large and potentially dangerous. This photo on the right was taken in my driveway. I killed that cow moose in the back when she charged me. She was tangled up with my dog, and you can see how close I was to her when I shot her. Those are my spent shotgun shells next to my tire. And unfortunately, it couldn't scare the calf away. And I called the troopers, and the troopers ended up putting the calf down. So, really unfortunate situation overall, but these moose can be pretty dangerous. This one here, this cow, trampled my neighbor about an hour before it came over here. He's all right now, but yeah, they can be pretty ornery. So that's one thing you want to watch out for. But the biggest danger of moose is really biggest danger for the moose and for the people is vehicle accidents. That causes the most fatalities in the state because they're huge animals. If you hit one with your vehicle, it could be really bad. So there are a few ways to mitigate that. Some experimental, like wildlife underpasses, where they can cross the road safely without getting hit. I think that's definitely something we should expand and look into to try to reduce the conflict. But when we get heavy snowfall years like we had this year, and we had that ice layer from that December snowstorm, the moose were more ornery than usual. They were using the roads and trails more. And it's something you need to be aware of for sure. So thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Remember to check out those links at the ADF&G if you want to learn more. And thanks. Have a good one.